Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this work. So I'll be talking about the imprint of climate change on Pan-Arctic marine vegetation. And this work has been done in collaboration among 15 scientists, many from the FACEIT projects, and many of whom are here today, but also with collaboration across the wider Arctic to cover the full Arctic region. It's based on a manuscript that is now in review at Frontiers in Marine Science. And so it's also our very first FACEIT product here. So it has been a really fruitful Pan-Arctic collaboration on this. So whereas climate change leads to loss of, endemic Arctic species and marine ecosystems associated with sea ice. And then for the benthic marine vegetation, we actually expect an increase with climate change because of the longer open water periods and also because of warming. So many of the dominant species of marine vegetation have a boreal origin and optimum temperatures that are far higher than what they currently experience in the Arctic. So what we wanted to do here was to compile and review time series from the Arctic region on benthic vegetation, macroalgae, and eelgrass. Or eelgrass is the only seagrass species that makes it to the Arctic. And we wanted to see if case studies already show this expected trend. And we looked for data representing either distribution or abundance or richness or productivity of these communities. And we looked for time series of at least 10 years. So that was one part of the study, compiling these time series. And then another part of the study was species distribution modeling for the current situation and also for the past, to see if this distribution modeling also would confirm the trends that we see from the time series. Yeah, so we managed to find 38 time series that extend into the 21st century. And they represent Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and Svalbard, Norway, and Russia. And they're shown here. So in green are shown all the time series that showed an increase or a northern migration of species. And in red are shown those few that represented a decline. And in black are shown all those that represented no change. And one of these time series had no data for the 21st century. So in total, 38 time series extending into the 21st century. And the squares represent studies of tidal macroalgae, the circles represent subtidal macroalgae, and the triangles represent studies of eelgrass. And as you can see, it's overall a green or black picture here that overall we found increases or no change. And actually we only saw 4 cases of declines. And those cases were generally associated with either grazing events, sea urchins grazing macroalgae, or places where turbidity was high and did not result in an overall improved light climate. So overall, these time series, they supported our hypothesis of expansion with a medium confidence, if we use the IPC confidence scale. So it's 5 to 8 in 10 of a chance of being correct. And in the following slides, I'll show a few of these examples. So one time series was on knotted rack, Ascophyllum nodosum, from Western Greenland in the Disco Bay area. So it's from this species is widely distributed from, northern Norway and all the way down to Portugal. And the northern distribution limit in Greenland is in the Disco Bay area. And this study compiles information on growth of Ascophyllum from Disco Bay. And this species is called knotted rack because it produces one knot every year. And the distance between these knots represents the speed of growth. So what was done here was to measure the distance between the knots at the tip. And this was done, we were lucky that actually colleagues did this already in the 50s. And then again in the 80s. And then we collected in this study from Maba et al. 2017 Ascophyllum from the more recent years and backtraced the growth. And what is clear is that the growth has increased hugely over the past couple of decades. Another example of an increase, no, actually this was not an increase, this is an example of a neutral change in growth of kelp in Young Sound, northeastern Greenland. So up there, the ice-free period is about 3 months per year. And nevertheless, we have a lot of benthic vegetation on the seafloor. We have Saccharina latissima, that grows about a meter per year. And in the Greenland Ecosystem Monitoring Program, this is measured every year. But first, we take a look at the length of the ice-free season here, from the 50s and onwards. And well, there's a clear increase over this entire period in the ice-free season. But if we focus in on the recent time period, where we also have data on blade growth of Saccharina, then we see that there's a huge interannual variability in the length of the ice-free season. And when looking at the blade growth, there's no clear trend for Saccharina. But if we combine, or if we plot the blade growth versus the number of ice-free days for the year of the collection of these plants and the previous year, then we see a linear relationship. So it is expected that with even longer ice-free seasons up there, then we would expect to see an increased leaf growth. And I can add that when collected in late August, the length of the blade expresses the annual growth of the species. This has been verified by blade marking techniques. So the measurements actually consist of fishing these kelps and measuring their length, the length of the annual blade. Then another time series from Svalbard on macroalgal biomass. But first, I took this image from a recent paper from Svalbard showing macroalgae along depth gradients and exposure gradients in Svalbard. I thought this was a really nice illustration. But the study in question here is from Kongsfjorden, led by Inka Baj. And it consists of data from 2012-13, shown in green here, compared with data from the same sites in 1996-98. And here it is shown for all the seaweeds along these depth gradients, and also separately for all kelps. And what appears is that the biomass of these macroalgae, they have increased over this period. And there is, on the other hand, also a tendency for the peak to be located higher up in the water column. And these changes have occurred along with observed climate change in the area in terms of longer open water period, but also increased turbidity. And the warming rate in this area has been 0.16 degrees per year. So here we see one of the clear examples of increase. Then Another example from Alaska. This is an example of decline in the density of kelp forests. This is a study from the Aleutian archipelago, from the Adak island, and the time series show market decline in the kelp density in the 90s, and it was associated with an increase, well, a loss of this decline in the sea otter population that promoted an increase in the population of sea urchins. And this has remained like this. So here we see also today a very impoverished kelp ecosystem. And actually there's a very recent study from this region showing that climate change may even aggravate the situation here, so that even the reefs below the forests are gradually being degraded. Yeah, so these were the examples from the trend, the compilation of trends, and then to the second part of the study, which was species distribution modeling, and it was conducted by Georges Assis, and he used machine learning algorithms, the boosted regression trees, and adaptive boosting to fit environmental predictors from the Ecological database. With some distribution records from the region. Distribution records compiled in a recent study from a global study on more than 1 million global macroalgal data. And these predictors, they were clipped to 30 meter steps, as this is a representative distribution of the dominant species in the region. So it was temperature and salinity that were predictors, as well as sea ice and nutrient concentrations. We had no mapped substrate information, so this is not included here. We did include just to try and adjust for this information from a recent study on the fraction of cliffs in a global study, but I'll talk more about this now. So the modeling was done both for subtidal species, both for intertidal species and for subtidal species, and both for the past, from 1940 to 50, and for the present situation. And in yellow or orange, you can see the modeled suitable habitats for the different components and over time. And in green, you can see the gain habitat suitability from the past to the present. And overall, in the present situation, the model computed an area of 145,000 square kilometers of subtidal macroalgae, and an area gain of about 6.6% from the 50s, and an average northern migration rate of 33 kilometers per decade. For the subtidal species, the computed area was 674,000 kilometers thereabout, with an area gain of about 30% since the 50s, and an average northern migration rate of about 18 kilometers per decade. So the total estimated area of macroalgae in the Pan-Arctic region by this first order model is 820,000 square kilometers. And if we adjust it for the fraction of cliffs, the cliffs is not really, it's not equivalent to the hard substrate that would be suitable for macroalgae, but it was the best we could do in terms of trying to adjust for substrate. Then we reduce this suitable area to about half. Yes, and so these changes are relevant because they have a major effect on the ecosystem function, because the macroalgae and seagrass meadows, they form important habitat for a wide variety of species, also economically important ones, such as cod, and also stimulate biodiversity and food webs, and also influence carbon and nutrient cycling. And I just compiled a few recent studies to highlight this. The role of kelp species as a biogenic habitat in coastal marine ecosystems, and a study showing that the macroalgae also, by their intense photosynthesis, tend to strip the water from CO2, thereby increase pH over the long Arctic summer. And this can be of advantage for calcifiers. Then there are studies showing the effect of macroalgae on the Arctic deep sea food webs, and also more local food webs, and studies showing that the expansion of the vegetation affects carbon and nutrient cycling. The study shown here is from Greenland, where expanding seagrass meadows seem to contribute new sediment carbon sinks in these areas. And there's also this recent study showing that marine deforestation leads to widespread loss of these ecosystem functions. And on the other hand, this increase that we see is expected to also be followed by an increase in all these ecosystem functions. So in conclusion, and the perspectives here, is that, well, we have here the first Pan-Arctic compilation of marine vegetation trends. And it was a pleasure to have, well, to be involved in this with colleagues from all across the Arctic region. And indeed, we could support, the data could support the hypothesis that my Arctic marine vegetation is expanding. And we find that these results can serve as a baseline also for future studies. And we expect that there will be a further future expansion and associated functional changes in the coastal ecosystems of the Arctic, and that this may even have global significance because of the really long Arctic coastline that covers about 35% of the global coastline. And we also see a need for a Pan-Arctic agenda to assess the status and trends beyond these scattered studies, and also to ensure sustainable management of this important ecosystem. And we owe thanks to a lot of funding sources and other colleagues. So thank you.